Call me Ghost Rider. I am summoned when innocent blood is shed, and you have shed much innocent blood. Do you dare face the agony of those you have slain?
In 1949, Magazine Enterprises debuted the first Ghost Rider, a horror-themed Western hero named Rex Fury. While never a huge success, the character did carry a string of books until the institution of the Comics Code. Eventually, the trademark lapsed, and Marvel Comics created their own horror-free Western Ghost Rider by the name of Carter Slade, developed by Roy Thomas, Gary Friedrich, and Dick Ayers. People might be asking who this white-draped cowboy is. Isn't Ghost Rider a fiery biker skeleton who wears leather and burns souls? Well, he is, but not at first. Before the Hellfire-wielding Ghost Rider, Marvel produced another Ghost Rider book with a different concept. Some of the confusion between Ghost Rider volume numbers stems from this and the various fictional properties dubbed Ghost Rider. The Magazine Enterprises character has his own Volume 1. The first Marvel character, Carter Slade, has a first volume, and the second Marvel character, the Hellfire biker named Johnny Blaze, is Volume 2, despite some reprint collections labeling him as Volume 1. These different characters also share creators, adding to some of the similarities and transferred continuity. Dick Ayers worked on the Magazine Enterprises Rider, along with Marvel's Carter Slade, and Roy Thomas and Gary Friedrich, who worked on Carter Slade with Ayers, would then go on to develop Johnny Blaze, who is more or less the most recognizable Ghost Rider. That, combined with all the soft resets and retcons to Ghost Rider's character, make for a convoluted publication history. Moving on to Johnny Blaze, when Roy Thomas and Gary Friedrich pitched the supernatural Ghost Rider, he was supposed to be a Daredevil villain. Before Frank Miller's debut, Daredevil was a B-list character. Miller himself described him as the poor man's Spider-Man. Thomas saw him as an extremely lackluster character. The principal argument was that the concept of the supernatural Ghost Rider is bigger than Daredevil, or at least bigger than what the character was at the time. Thomas created the supervillain named Stuntmaster when Friedrich started his run on Daredevil. Stuntmaster was a success, and despite Daredevil's popularity or lack thereof, it paved the way for Marvel to approve the pitch for a new supernatural hero. Friedrich said that he'd like this new character to be called Ghost Rider, and Thomas would then reply that the character deserved his own book. This is where we get some disagreement. Mike Ploog was called in to design the character with Thomas, giving him his skull head, Elvis 68 special jumpsuit, and adding the flames. However, Friedrich disagrees and says all the aesthetics were his idea. Mike Ploog would say that he doesn't remember, but ultimately it doesn't matter, because the dispute was centered on whether to make a skull, add flames, or just give him a helmet, and it all worked out for the best. This eventually led to a lawsuit between Friedrich and Marvel over the character's ownership, with the winner being Marvel. The decision stated that Friedrich signed away his ownership when he signed checks that relinquished any hold he had on the character, and he actually owes Marvel money over the use of Ghost Rider. A judge later overturned this decision by saying the language was ambiguous, causing the issue to reopen. Friedrich's lawyers hold that both parties have resolved their differences. So at this point, Johnny Blaze was created, despite some of the later ownership issues, but Marvel still had the old Ghost Rider Western series, which could be a problem. Marvel came up with what they thought was an easy fix: rename him. The non-supernatural Ghost Rider became Knight Rider in a reprint series, a member of the Ku Klux Klan who rode through the American South. Oh, wait, that's not what you meant. Yes, Marvel did not foresee the connotations of the Knight Rider name and promptly renamed the character to Phantom Rider, who would then appear in his own books and alongside Ghost Rider with an original backup feature in the Johnny Blaze reprint series. AC Comics then began reprinting the characters of Magazine Enterprises, including their version of Ghost Rider, who was renamed the Haunted Horseman due to Marvel's trademark on the name. Now let's shift the focus to Marvel Spotlight number 5 from 1972, where Johnny Blaze is introduced as the Ghost Rider. Johnny Blaze is the son of stunt cyclist Barton Blaze, who dies during a show. Without a family, Johnny is invited to stay with Crash and Roxanne Simpson, who run the bike show Barton was a part of. His decision to stay is almost entirely due to his desire to stay with Roxanne. Johnny would then work with his new family and dream of the day he would be able to ride in the show. However, Mrs. Simpson wasn't supportive of Johnny's plans, thinking it's far too dangerous. At age 15, Johnny is practicing with Roxanne on a bike when suddenly the bike catches on fire. Roxanne jumps off, but Johnny tries to drive it as far away from the show as possible to prevent anyone from getting hurt. He crashes into a tree and the bike explodes next to Mrs. Simpson, who came running after Johnny. She dies from her injuries, but not before asking Johnny to promise he would never ride in the show. Over the years, this is hard for Johnny to comply with, and he decides to practice in secret while his family labels him a coward since they didn't know of Mrs. Simpson's dying request. While Johnny practices, Roxanne catches him and believes him to be the best stunt cyclist ever. Johnny is able to tolerate the insults of Crash and the show crew because of his love for Roxanne. The bike show then gets a big break with the opportunity for a show at Madison Square Garden. Crash is less than pleased because he's just learned that he only has a month to live due to cancer. Johnny, revealing that he's read about the occult since childhood, calls Satan and makes a deal, his soul in exchange for Crash's health. Crash is then cured but killed while performing a stunt over 22 cars. Johnny, in his anguish, performs and succeeds at the stunt to honor Crash, but Roxanne is less than pleased since he showed no regard for her feelings after her father's death. Satan then arrives to claim Johnny's soul, but Roxanne comes to his aid, revealing that she's also read his books and her purity protects him. The two agree to stay together for his protection, but that night Johnny transforms and realizes he's been cursed with the Ghost Rider. At night, regardless of Roxanne, Johnny transforms into this fiery skeletal figure and rides through the town until the morning, when the transformation ends. As Ghost Rider, Johnny is covered in a substance called Hellfire, which is cold and burns the soul. He has complete mastery over it, and can use it to upgrade any vehicle of his choosing or even create a new vehicle from scratch. This is where the pure Hellfire bike comes from in Ghost Rider number 3. This is an ability he loses in number 9, but regains it after facing the Challenger in issue 18. Marvel's Spotlight issues 5 through 12 deal mainly with Satan's quest to get Johnny's soul. He even resurrects a demon in the form of Crash Simpson in an attempt to force Johnny back to him. In 1973, Ghost Rider received his own title, and continued this trend of fighting Satan until issue 7, where a longer story was crafted. Johnny is invited to become a Hollywood stunt cyclist. This often allows him to use the Ghost Rider form as a cover, since everyone he meets sees it as a television special effect instead of a monstrous figure or demon. While Johnny deals with his new career, Roxanne is tormented by Satan to give up her protection of Johnny, because Satan has Crash Simpson's soul. At first, she sees this as a lie, since Crash never struck a deal and Satan has no claim on him, but he haunts her with a ghostly figure of Crash, which eventually forces her to give in. Satan then reveals he was lying the whole time, and she is grief-stricken. Unable to bear these events, she decides to leave on a mission to grow up and mature. This is the beginning of Tony Isabella's run on Ghost Rider, and he introduces a character called the Friend, and developed the concept that Ghost Rider's transformation is no longer limited to nighttime. This would later evolve from night transformations to transformations in the presence of evil. The Friend appeared in Ghost Rider number 9, and rejected Satan's claim on Johnny's soul. Satan, clearly upset with his appearance, backs away, and the Friend began a quest to guide Johnny Blaze away from hell. Over the course of Isabella's run, Johnny starts dating Karen Page, who works with him in a soap opera, and this lasts from issue 13 to issue 26. The Friend story is sprinkled throughout these issues, with the character appearing in what seems to be random situations. In issue 15, Johnny again sees the Friend when he is trying to kill a criminal by the name of the Orb. The Friend talks him out of it, and Johnny, regretting his rage, rides off to try and calm himself. In Ghost Rider issues 18 and 19, Johnny faces the obstacles of the Challenger, who is a demon that tortures Blaze with illusions. The Challenger reveals that the Friend is nothing more than another demonic illusion designed to give Johnny a false sense of hope. While disturbed by this, Ghost Rider manages to defeat the demon. If the end of the Friend storyline seems a little anticlimactic, it's because it was a 2-year storyline that was changed by editorial mandate at the very last minute. Tony Isabella originally intended for the Friend to be Jesus Christ. He explains that with Gary Friedrich designing the rule that Roxanne kept Satan away, Isabella challenged it and describes writing himself into a corner as to what to do about Satan without Roxanne. Steve Gerber jokingly said he should just have God save Johnny, and Isabella ran with that idea. He pitched it to Roy Thomas, who approved the 2-year-long story arc and the ultimate plan for the character. Len Wein and Marv Wolfman were also supportive of the move until Jim Shooter, who took over editorial duties with issue 19, the final issue of the story arc, rewrote the ending. Isabella claims this is because Shooter, being an agnostic, was offended by the Jesus plot point. However, the argument can be made that this sort of reveal would seriously hinder the creative direction and viability of the Ghost Rider character. And more than agnostics, Christians are likely to be offended if the Jesus character is not an accurate representation, causing the book to fall into unwanted controversy and intense scrutiny. Isabella's argument was that the book was already getting that kind of attention by Christian groups, similar to the protests of Odin worshippers who did not approve of the Thor title. Isabella and Shooter never quite got along, with Isabella calling him arrogant, overrated, and just plain nasty. Isabella eventually went to DC, saying that Marvel was never as fun as it was under Roy Thomas, and while Ghost Rider wasn't the cause of this per se, it certainly didn't help his relationship with the editorial staff. During his run, Isabella crafted a team of heroes called the Champions for Ghost Rider to join, but the lineup and premise have often been criticized as awkward and forced. Additionally, a lawsuit was filed against Marvel using the name the Champions, and this forced the company to abandon its trademark of the name and the team altogether. Isabella's run suffered from an extremely lackluster ending caused by the derailment of the story, but at the same time, what he had planned going forward would not have been much better. He claimed that if he continued his work on the book, he would have removed all supernatural elements, cancelled Blaze's work in Hollywood, and married him off to Roxanne. He wanted to create, quote, the superhero equivalent of Bonanza. After this slight halt in creative flow, the Ghost Rider titles staggered, with important plot developments coming few and far between. In issue 46, Johnny loses his title as the best stunt cyclist to Flag Fargo, and in issue 63, Johnny starts working for the Quentin Carnival. The slower pace ended with issues 68 to 81. Ghost Rider became a tighter narrative, reinventing previous ideas and adding more to the mythology. At this point, Johnny no longer transformed solely in appearance. Ghost Rider became a separate entity entirely that battled for control with Johnny. Issue 68 begins this reinvention by retelling the origin of the character. Johnny reflects on his life while confessing to a priest and then inevitably changing into the Ghost Rider to punish him, since the priest was actually a murderer and a thief. Issues 76 and 77 expand on the origins of the Ghost Rider entity inside Johnny. A demon by the name of Asmodeus appears before Mephisto, Lord of the Netherworld. Asmodeus asks to take control of the Ghost Rider, revealing his name to be Zarathos. Mephisto suggests that Ghost Rider and Johnny Blaze be divided and forced to run a gauntlet, and if Asmodeus can stop them from completing their run, they are his. Johnny and Zarathos work together, defeating the demons at Asmodeus' disposal, but their final test lies before the exit portal. Thinking that entering the portal together would unite them, the two battle over who would go first, and are joined when teleported back to Earth. Mephisto reveals that had the two walked through the portal in harmony, they would have stayed separated. Mephisto then adds that he is punishing Zarathos by forcing him to fight evil and collect souls for hell. Issue 77 reveals Zarathos' origin through the introduction of a character called Nightmare. Nightmare lives in the subconscious. He contacts Zarathos with a plan to take over Johnny Blaze's body. To establish trust, he helps him remember his origins. In ancient times, a tribe looking for relief from hardship uses dark magic to summon a demon by the name of Zarathos. Zarathos would provide them with power and victories over their enemies, and anyone captured by the tribe would be sent to Zarathos to be devoured. As his power grew, Mephisto could not stand the thought of a greater force than him, so he took a prince and princess as pawns in his plan to stop him. The acolytes of Zarathos brutally defeated the prince and captured the princess. The prince then climbed to the highest point he could find to demand help from anyone who could give it. Mephisto then appeared to strike a deal with him. The princess, now prisoner, was taken to be devoured by Zarathos, and Mephisto used this to force the prince into a deal and forfeit his soul. He arrived to save the princess and confront the demon only to be attacked. It was then revealed that Zarathos could not burn the soul of a man who has none, and so he instead burned himself, all according to Mephisto's plan. Mephisto then appeared to capture the soul of Zarathos, who has become so weak that the belief of his acolytes are no longer enough to sustain him. Mephisto made him his slave, erasing his memories and forcing him to collect evil souls for his dimension instead of for himself. He then took control of Zarathos' hellfire and can now use it as he wishes. The prince, who escaped with his wife, was then forced to leave her because a man with no soul cannot love or hope even for death. Thus the reign of Zarathos ended, and now he aligns himself with Nightmare in order to take over Johnny Blaze's body and gain back what he lost. Johnny, while Zarathos is relearning his history, starts to develop a greater force of will, which allows him to call to Ghost Rider, ruining Nightmare's plan to simply allow Blaze to die without Ghost Rider's aid. In the final 2 issues of the series, Roxanne returns asking for Johnny's help with a cult leader who was stealing souls with a crystal. The mastermind behind the cult turns out to be a character from issue 74 by the name of Centurius. Centurius reveals that he is actually the same prince who helped defeat Zarathos, and he has been doomed to walk the earth alone ever since. He studied magic and stole the Crystal of Souls in hopes to regain what he had lost. Mephisto saw through this and instead forced him to only take from others to deny their pleasure. After his encounter with Blaze and Ghost Rider in issue 74, he learned of Zarathos' rebirth and used all of his knowledge to find the one thing Blaze loves, Roxanne. He reveals that all of these events were a ploy to trap Blaze and Zarathos. Zarathos and Johnny managed to work together long enough to defeat Centurius and lock him away in the crystal. Then, Johnny, using his renewed hope and power of will, activates the crystal and traps Zarathos away, freeing him and giving him a chance to start over with Roxanne. This ends the first volume of the reimagined supernatural Ghost Rider. Unique to many mainstream comics, the title was given a definitive ending that answered most of the long-standing questions of who Ghost Rider was and what Blaze's ultimate fate with the devil would be. Johnny is freed of Zarathos and allowed to live an ordinary life, though this does fail to explain why Satan can no longer claim him. He no longer has any defenses, and while Roxanne is there, Satan doesn't even try to force her away again, he simply gives up. By now there might be some confusion as to who Satan is versus who Mephisto is, the former being after Johnny in the original issues, while the latter was part of the reinvention done in the last 14 issues. For all intents and purposes, they are both the same, as Mephisto is often called Satan, but the Marvel Universe has many incarnations of hell and its rulers. Marvel retconned Satan and made Johnny's deal with Mephisto, though they never completely removed Satan's influence, as he still fought Satana, Satan's daughter, Damien Hellstorm, Satan's son, who would eventually overthrow his father and become the new Satan, and Satan himself in another retcon with Daniel Way in 2006. Over the course of 81 issues, the title faced many creator issues, with a dispute between Marvel and Gary Friedrich, Marvel's Satan retcon, and Jim Shooter's battle with Tony Isabella, but it still managed to establish a mythology and mystery around the figure of the Ghost Rider. The concept would evolve slowly with the help of many creative teams, similar to the Hulk. Marvel Spotlight number 5 and Ghost Rider number 1 don't reflect the definitive version or even the true vision of the characters as originally conceived. Ghost Rider was molded by various writers until the concept of two souls fighting for control of one body was introduced and gave the title a new direction, a superhero that's really just a man living with a demonic possession. The one aspect that never changed was the design of the character, a fiery skeleton who rode a motorcycle, and much like Daredevil, this gave the book a very distinct visual appeal. Many of the stories scattered in these 81 issues were inspired by nothing more than the exercise of placing this monstrous figure into visually interesting scenes. While everything for the title seems to have wrapped up nicely, the book was actually cancelled. But the creative teams learned of this well enough in advance to craft a fitting ending to Johnny Blaze's adventures with Zarathos as the Ghost Rider. Earlier I made the statement that Johnny Blaze is more or less the most recognizable Ghost Rider. So what do I mean by more or less? Is he or isn't he? The name Johnny Blaze is certainly popular thanks to the character having the most appearances over the course of multiple titles and adaptations. However, the jumpsuit look is something that hasn't carried over. Next time we'll look at the 1990s and introduction of Danny Ketch. While the name might draw a blank, the leather-clad figure with a chain and pennant stare will ring bells. None of these costume or power developments were for Johnny Blaze. They started with Danny and his spirit of vengeance.